We know there's going to be impact. Some categories of jobs are going to shrink. Other ones are going to grow. So we didn't think about social media influencers or prompt engineers as job categories until the last couple of years, but those are clearly new jobs. But we will probably also see a number of job categories shrink. And with generative AI, there seems to be some feeling that that's probably going to be those administrative tasks more generally that will be impacted moving forward. That clearly could impact wages with regard to wages related to those jobs and those roles. And it's probably therefore going to have a lot of impact on job quality, job satisfaction, worker well-being more broadly as well.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI, and I'm excited that you're tuning into the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Rebecca Finaly as our guest. Rebecca is the CEO at the Partnership on AI and is leading the charge to make sure that developments in AI advance positive outcomes for people and society. If you're someone interested in ethical responsibility and the way that AI is affecting our society, you are not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to Augmented AI for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we're super excited to talk to Rebecca today, and we can't wait to learn more from her. Let's get to it. Rebecca, welcome to the Shift AI podcast. It is so nice to have you today. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I've had an opportunity to listen to so many of your podcasts, great topics and interviews, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, me too. It's a really important topic. And when I talk to people out in the world about AI and about work, they're always asking me questions about jobs and how it relates to their future. And so we'll talk about a lot of things today, but we'll try to predict the future in some ways and discuss the way that we think that's going to shape up. But before we do, I want to just talk a little bit about your background. You've had an amazing background, so I'm not going to cover it all, and you can fill in the blanks for me too. You were in the banking industry, vice president in financial institutions. You did a bunch of work as director of public affairs and cancer control. You were a senior advisor communications to the Toronto Region of Research Alliance, vice president, engagement and policy at CIFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. I want to hear a little bit more about that. And now you are the CEO of Partnership on AI, which we're going to have plenty of time to unpack. What is the work that you did at CIFAR?
Yeah, great question. Well, CIFAR, as it's also referred to, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, is this amazing Canadian-based global research organization that builds international, interdisciplinary research programs around frontier questions of research. So fascinating things all around, implications for sustainability and life on this planet, as well as early child and brain development, all the way through to quantum computing and information science, and of course, artificial intelligence. So the very first program at CIFAR, long before my arrival there, was artificial intelligence, robotics, and society. And so I came to CIFAR to fulfill the mission of connecting research directly into society. So looking for those opportunities to mobilize evidence and research to drive policy change, to drive better, healthier, and more resilient communities, and to drive technological innovation and transformation in workplaces as well. And one of the areas that I was thrilled to work on was the question of AI and its implications for society. And so much of the early research that emerged was around some of these long-term questions. One of them clearly aligned with the work that you're focusing on, the future of work. But in the early days, there weren't the community of experts outside of computer scientists who were as directly engaged in this. So the economists, the legal scholars, the public policy makers, the ethicists, the sociologists, all of those experts that we now think are fundamental to understanding the way in which AI is transforming the world around us. And so I was really delighted to lead some of the effort to bring those voices into the room together with the AI researchers to think about the implications for democracy, for information ecosystems, for the labor market, and really in the early days begin to chart this out, and directly aligns with the work that we now do at the Partnership on AI.
Yeah, I want to talk about that link between CFAR and the Partnership for AI, but just to go back in time, was public policy something that you always thought about, society and public policy? And was that something that your family was involved in? Is there a history of that in your family? Did you talk about that at the dinner table? How did you get excited about this topic?
Yeah, so public policy, political science, political and social theory, that's my disciplinary background and what really drives some of my interest around how we center humans and communities and countries in the conversation around AI and security and safety. My early memories of my family are many, many dinner time conversations about what was happening in the world. My father was an Anglican minister, in the United States, that would be an Episcopalian minister. So lots of interest in thinking about what we are doing to serve our communities, social justice. My mother was an early journalist, then a school teacher. So very much focused on these questions at an early age, and really strong encouragement from my parents to be questioning the world around us and exploring ways in which we each individually could have impact. I take a lot of my motivation today from those early days.
That's great. Well, it's such a interesting topic because I think that most people I talk to, there's a lot of fear when they think about AI. And there certainly are a lot of optimists in the technology space, but in the public, there's a lot of fear. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, what you're hearing out there in society and how that's playing out with the advancements that we're seeing this last year, how fast it was, and people's reticence to really engage.
Well, no surprise that people and communities would be fearful when what appears to be this pace of technological change and advancement. And really, the last year is such a clear signal of that, with the launch of ChatGPT and then the launch of these other chat mechanisms like Claude, like Bard, and then the integration of those into other technology platforms and enterprise-wide systems. We really have seen, I think, a step change, both in terms of the technology itself, but also in terms of its entry into the mainstream. You might remember the summer before last, when there was the concern about the models coming and becoming sentient. And this sort of took on a wave of mainstream interest. And my 20-year-old son at the time was working up north, up in a camp up north in the summer. And he called me out of the blue and said, "Mom, is it true? Are computers now sentient?" And I thought, wow, if this has reached the level where a son is calling a mother to ask a question about this, it truly has hit the mainstream. But that was just one of the examples. And that was before ChatGPT even launched. That was really the early days of these large language models being deployed. So yes, I think no surprise that people are bewildered and concerned, and also excited and engaged. And so what often happens is you see these two very different perspectives emerge: those who are the technology adopters, those who are excited about how they can use this technology to move forward, and others who feel as if this is somehow out of their control. From my perspective, I would like to think of it more like we think about a Fitbit or a heart rate monitor. I think our pulse should be up a bit. We should be in that active and engaged mode of, thinking about what this technology means. What are the questions? How should we be responding, both proactively thinking about new opportunities, but also responding to current potential harms and risks, but not be in that zone where we're so fearful that we somehow feel this is out of control and out of our hands to make choices about the future we want for ourselves.
Before we go further with the interview, I want to take a moment to tell you about one of our podcast sponsors, Augmented AI, and how they are transforming businesses with Gen AI solutions. Augmented AI specializes in helping organizations uncover and address internal workflow challenges that Gen AI can solve. Their comprehensive process starts by identifying and prioritizing business problems, and then assessing each based on value, effort, and risk. Once a problem is selected, the Augmented AI team tests and validates the solution to ensure that it works. Only after this thorough validation do they draft technical requirements, which serve as a blueprint for building and deploying the solutions. The real beauty of partnering with Augmented AI is that they don't just stop at strategy and feasibility studies. They actually stand up the solutions and manage them for you so you can focus on what you do best. If you're interested in experiencing this innovative approach to deploying Gen AI solutions, visit simplyaugmented.ai and click on the Learn More button. That's simplyaugmented.ai. Now back to the episode. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when you think about the work that you're doing at Partnership on AI, what is the thesis and how, kind of connect the dots between CFAR and Partnership on AI, and how are you talking about AI in the world?
Yeah, well, I think there's such a critical moment to be reaching across sectors and across disciplines and countries and perspectives to think about and explore how do we truly ensure that this AI is developed for the benefit of people and society. And you're right. My belief in multi-stakeholderism comes from an early time in my career, just before I went to CFAR, when Toronto and the Toronto region was hit by what some would call the grandfather of COVID, SARS. And as you may remember, it had impacted specific regions in North America, and one of them was the Toronto region in Canada. And as a result, the region was really struggling economically to come out of that. And I saw a community come together. It brought together mayors across several cities within the region. It brought together CEOs of companies, many of them the technology companies that were based here. It brought together academics, heads of universities, colleges, people engaged in education and otherwise, and real thinkers who were exploring at that time, how do you build creative and flourishing regions? Now, this was a community that didn't agree about anything. Really, really very different perspectives. But the one thing they agreed upon was the need to act together in this moment to make change happen. And so there were a series of economic and social benefits which flowed into the region based on the work that that community did together. But what's been really interesting for me is the long tail of that, the impact over time, the institutions that reach across sectors that were set up and are now having really phenomenal impact in the region more broadly and have just become part of the way of doing business. So I'm a big believer in the importance of those types of organizations. And that is really the vision for the Partnership on AI. It came out of a moment back in 2016, 2017, when many of the large technology companies realized that there were just so many questions that needed to be answered in community with experts, not only within their own companies and not only within the private sector, but actually within academia and civil society more broadly. And so that was the impetus for the Partnership on AI. Now we're about 120 partners in 16 countries globally, and it's really an exciting place to be.
We've seen a lot of action globally this last year with the EU starting to think about the way that they are going to show up and regulate AI. The President of the United States with his executive order. We're starting to see states, and we've been talking to politicians on this show about the way that, facial recognition and privacy policies and AI are going to make its way into Senate bills in the states. How do you think about public policy and AI regulation in particular? How do you see that shaping up? What are the things that you care about and that you're hearing your constituency and your partnership care about as it relates to AI regulation?
It's so important to see the level of interest from public policymakers now. And part of the theory of change for the Partnership on AI is to really focus on advancing better practice. So making sure that we're standing up the resources, recommendations, frameworks, codes of conduct that really drive better practice. And at the same time, to inform innovations in public policy. And one of the interesting things that I'm particularly pleased to see is that there are many policy levers that governments have, whether it's at the state level or at the national level or at the regional level like the EU or at the international level like the G7. And each one of those levels has started to really engage and think through what are the appropriate instruments and levers that they should be using in this moment. So you see something like the EU AI Act, which is very much around regulation and thinking about risk frameworks for regulation. And then you see something quite distinctly different out of the executive order, which is thinking much more on a very broad basis about what are the questions that need to be answered for public policymakers in order to advance potential regulation. And of course, that's a dynamic of the situation right within the US and the ability to advance work through Congress versus something like the EU AI Act that's been underway for many, many years and has through the trilogue process, as they would call it. And now finally we have a final draft that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks so that we can all take a look at that. So I think public policymakers have a key role to play. And I think they have many different instruments they can use, all the way from procurement to influence, like for example, the work that happened around the White House commitments and calling all of the CEOs to come to DC to meet with the president and the vice president about those topics. Those are all ways in which public policymakers can show that this is an important area, that they're focused on it, and they're thinking about what it means to their citizens and communities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Here in the state of Washington, where I live in Seattle, we're working to educate politicians in the state house and also locally, because I think there's a hunger for learning about this content and being able to act accordingly. And I think large companies that are deep in AI and deep in this technology want to be able to engage on policy with a well-educated political establishment. Are you involved at all in education as part of the partnership? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's such a key piece. I mean, I feel like we're all continuing to educate ourselves as we try to keep up to speed with what's happening. So we do a lot of briefing sessions with public policy makers to educate them about the environment, the work that we're doing, and better understanding the landscape, the evolution of the technological change. And otherwise, we hold roundtables to bring together a variety of different perspectives in that work. But I do think it's been also very heartening to see the real focus, things like the Insights Forum sessions that were held in the Senate and otherwise, to really try to bring policymakers up to speed. I recently had the opportunity to attend the AI Safety Summit that was held by the UK government back in November. I don't know if you remember it. A number of countries came together to participate, and I was honored to receive an invitation, and I chaired the session at the historic Bletchley Park, focused specifically on national policymakers and what should national policymakers do. And I was really pleased to see the level of engagement, interest, questioning, and thoughtfulness that the variety of different government representatives brought to that conversation. So I'm also heartened by that. I'm very happy to see that there's a real interest and a desire to be educated. And we believe that's just core to thinking about how we make sure that the benefits of this technology accrue to the many. How can we help to bring those communities together, and what can we both share out, but also learn from them. A key part of our work is focusing on really trying to understand how you include diverse voices and perspectives in the development of the technology itself. This has been a core part of the conversation around foundation models and generative AI, but it's been an ongoing conversation. So how do you do that effectively, respectfully? And that, of course, gets right back to the question of workers and the role of workers in the development of the technology, too.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode.
I want to go deeper and talk about workers and jobs. It's every single time I talk to somebody, they're asking me about jobs. Is it going to take my job? And it's what's on top of everyone's mind. Can you tell me about how, like, as you look into the future and think about the jobs that are going to be created and the jobs that are going to be lost, like, what is your mental model for thinking about job creation as it relates to AI and also job loss?
Well, the one thing we do know, and it seems to be there's good consensus across the economics community about this, is that there is going to be significant impact in the broader labor market. You may have seen the report out of Goldman Sachs estimating that about 300 million jobs, or 16-17% of jobs globally, will be impacted by actually just by this new form of generative AI. And of course, we're already experiencing the impacts of AI more generally across the labor market as well. And so, yes, we know there's going to be impact. Some categories of jobs are going to shrink. Other ones are going to grow. So we didn't think about social media influencers or prompt engineers as job categories until the last couple of years, but those are clearly new jobs. But we will probably also see a number of job categories shrink. And with generative AI, there seems to be some feeling that that's probably going to be those administrative tasks more generally that will be impacted. And so clearly it's going to have an impact on jobs and job categorization moving forward. That clearly could impact wages with regard to wages related to those jobs and those roles. And it's probably therefore going to have a lot of impact on job quality, job satisfaction, worker well-being more broadly as well. So again, an area that I believe employers and worker organizations should be thinking about right now in terms of what do they need. One area is clearly, as you mentioned, around education and skills development and technical education and capacity moving forward. I will say that one of the difficulties in predicting the future is we always talked about the future of work as really focusing on robots and robots moving into warehouses and advanced manufacturing and all of those sorts of things. But of course, with generative AI, we're seeing much more impact on call centers, for example, where we're seeing, lots of interest in call center workers about the capacity for it to boost productivity, but then also concerns about surveillance and data tracking as well. So I think, it's really hard to predict the future. It's one of the things we as humans have a lot of difficulty doing. And that means we can make choices and we can be prepared and we can be thinking about what does this mean to really advancing better workplace settings and real productivity gains for employers.
What do you think employers and businesses, what's their responsibility? What should business leaders be thinking about? What kind of choices should they be making as it relates to this technology?
Well, we just released what we call our shared prosperity guidelines. And interestingly, great example of multi-stakeholder work, brought together a number of technology companies with a number of labor and worker organizations, economists who are studying this, social scientists who are thinking about these implications, people working across public policy around some of these dimensions. And we said it's really important for employers to understand when they are researching the deployment of a new technology into the workforce, that they understand early on what the signals of opportunity are, how they, what about this new technique is going to drive worker performance, boost productivity, maybe have efficiency gains associated with it, which of course is important, but also really is centering worker well-being as part of it. And what are those signals of real risk? What do they need to attend to early on to make sure that it's being deployed in a way that is not going to be harmful to workers? And in doing this work, it's like a job impact assessment that an employer can do early on in the process to help to make decisions about how to deploy technology into that space. And then we have a series of guidelines that come out of that analysis that are really intended to drive both AI creating technology companies as well as AI using companies and workers and public policymakers as well. So really just trying to, again, ensure that companies are able to make the choice. If you want to be a highly regarded, talent attracting company, having a technology strategy and plan around these sorts of questions is going to be crucial.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, one of the things that comes up for me when I think about this technology, and I think as I look into the future, I think people that have a high EQ are going to be very valued. People that can connect with other people are going to be very valued. And I think that's exciting. And I also wonder, when you think about humans in your past that have connected with you and mentored you and taught you things, who comes to mind? And can you talk a little bit about your experiences and your mentors?
Well, I have to say and just reiterate that intellectual curiosity and questioning that came from my parents in those early days really has been fundamental. I know a lot of people point to their parents as mentors, but clearly that's something that I hold tight to what I do. But I also was very lucky in the diversity of executive leadership roles that I had to work with senior leaders who encouraged questioning from their senior teams as well, really encouraged thinking outside of the box, exploring new ways of working, challenging often what in some cases one would think of as, core elements of a business strategy or approach. And I can think of one mentor in particular who taught me not only to create space for those questions and the resulting disruption and creativity that came from them, but really encourage this notion of bringing people around a table from outside the organization to be part of that creative process. And it really has given me some great insights in thinking about leadership, both within the organization, but more broadly as well.
That's really powerful. I appreciate that comment. So I always ask this question towards the end of this show about the future of work. And I think it's interesting to kind of limit people's answers. So I always ask, what are the 2 words that you would use to describe the future of work? And then you can elaborate. But what would the 2 words be for you?
Well, I think the first word would be people. And that comes back to this question of choice. And that one of the things that I find remarkable about working with some of these emerging technologies and integrating them into our own work streams and thinking about their implications for others is the people who developed these technologies and the ingenuity and creativity that went into it. And then also How do we as people think about all of those dimensions of responsibility and trust and community that drive the importance of this technology? So people are just core to the future of work, and I always come back to that sense of people centered. And then I have to say, wonder. I mean, I think it is truly inspiring to see where this technology could take us and its profound opportunity. I would not be doing this work if I was not truly optimistic about its profound ability to deal with challenges like climate change and healthcare crises and all of the things that are so crucially important to the future of our world. And so people and wonder would be my two words.
I love those two words. I mean, I share your feeling that we have control and power over these machines and that we're going to be part of the solution. And so I really appreciate your perspective on it. And I love the work that you're doing. I think that the regulation that's going to be happening in the next couple of years is going to be super, super important. And you are right at the tip of the spear on helping create those partnerships. And so, Rebecca, I really appreciate you being on the show and speaking with us. And I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it as well.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Rebecca as our guest on today's episode. Rebecca brings a unique perspective into how to advance AI in a way that is positive and responsible. If you want to stay connected to Rebecca, you can find her on LinkedIn and X. And if you're interested in how she thinks about emerging technology, definitely connect with her and keep up with her posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly, truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews, and to the Augmented AI Weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we are grateful to have the show sponsored by Augmented AI. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel.